Welcome to this explainer brought to you by Clarified Decode. Today, we're unlocking something pretty massive, the ultimate mental model for system architecture. If you've ever felt, completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of technologies, diagrams, and patterns out there, well, you're absolutely in the right place. Let's get into it.
So imagine this. You're standing at a whiteboard, the marker is literally slipping in your sweaty hand, and the interviewer just drops this bomb. Design Uber, or maybe design a global payment system. And you've got exactly 15 minutes to prove you can think like a senior architect. Terrifying, right? How on earth do you structure your thoughts without just spiraling into total chaos?
Well, here is our playbook to cut through all that noise. We're going to quickly move through 4 things: the architect's zoom lens, 6 must-know diagrams, an e-commerce checkout in action, and finally, your blueprint for acing that interview.
All right, starting with part 1, the architect's zoom lens. This is arguably the most important mental model a software architect can possess, something called progressive zoom. Think of system design exactly like zooming in on a map app on your phone. I mean, you'd never start by looking at a bedroom layout if you're trying to understand the layout of an entire city, right? You start way zoomed out with a business idea. Then you step in a bit to the high-level design, or HLD. That's your city map. Next is the architecture, so the building plan. Then we look at the flow diagram, which shows how traffic actually moves between those buildings. From there, you zoom right into the low-level design, the specific blueprint of a single room. And finally, you get all the way down to the actual code. This sequence, it's exactly how senior architects organize their thoughts.
Moving to section 2, 6 must-know diagrams. Now, what's really interesting here, and honestly a huge relief, is that you absolutely do not need to memorize dozens of different diagrams.
Believe it or not, there are actually 14 official UML diagrams floating around out there. But if we apply the 80-20 rule, mastering just 6 crucial ones will literally prepare you for 99% of interview questions. You really just want to focus your energy exclusively on these Tier 1 diagrams.
So here's your core toolkit. You've got the high-level design, the architecture diagram, the sequence diagram, the flow diagram, the deployment diagram, and lastly, the database entity relationship, or ER, diagram. If you master just these 6, you are already miles ahead of the competition.
Now, let's clear up a super common point of confusion: contrasting HLD with architecture. A lot of people mix these two up. Your HLD just shows the major building blocks. We're talking a user, an order service, a payment service. Notice what's missing? There are no classes, no methods, no code. It simply answers what exists. But when you shift gears to the architecture diagram, you are answering where is everything running. This is where you start dropping in the internet, Cloudflare, your AWS application load balancers, Kubernetes, Redis, Prometheus. You're showing the entire technical ecosystem.
Similarly, let's look at flow versus sequence diagrams. A flow diagram maps the business process steps. It focuses on the journey, right? A user clicks buy, then we validate, then we check inventory. It's all about what happens next in the business logic. The sequence diagram, on the other hand, is all about the exact technical communication timeline. It actually shows who calls whom, like the user calling a login function on an API, which then queries the auth service, hits the database, and then passes a JWT token all the way back up the chain.
Now, standardizing your visual language is absolutely crucial. You really don't want to be up there inventing shapes on the fly while the clock is ticking. Keep it standard. A stick person is always a user or actor. A simple rectangle represents a service or component. You're going to use this one everywhere. A cylinder, that instantly tells the interviewer they are looking at a database. A cloud is the internet or your AWS environment. And those parallel bars or a little Q shape, that immediately signals a message broker like Kafka or an SQS queue. Using the right symbols just builds instant trust.
Okay, section 3, e-commerce checkout in action. Let's make this concrete and see how this all builds using a standard checkout scenario.
Here is our e-commerce city map. The basic business idea is simply a customer buys a product. So, at the HLD level, we just show the front end talking to an API. That routes to an order service, which then coordinates with payment, inventory, and notification services. It's clean, it's simple, and it immediately sets the stage for the rest of your conversation.
But now, zooming in, the architecture diagram reveals the whole technical ecosystem. We're explicitly naming the infrastructure here. The traffic hits an application load balancer. It flows into our Kubernetes cluster where those microservices actually live. We see Kafka being used for asynchronous messaging, probably to handle those notifications. We see Redis for fast caching and Postgres for our persistent data storage, all wrapped up nicely with a monitoring solution.
Then, shifting our lens over to the flow diagram, we trace the exact life cycle of the business process. User clicks buy, we validate, reserve stock, charge payment, create order, and finally send an email. Notice how we stepped away from the infrastructure for a second to focus purely on what happens. This proves to the interviewer that you actually understand the business requirements, not just the tech stack. Like, if the payment fails, what happens? This diagram maps out those critical decision points.
Finally, we zoom right inside one specific service for the LLD. We've officially reached the room blueprint. Instead of just a broad order service, we're now looking at the order controller, receiving the request, passing it to an order service class, which might use a payment gateway interface, and relying on an order repository to write to SQL using dependency injection. This is your moment to showcase your knowledge of software design patterns and really stand out. Moving to our final section, acing the design interview. Armed with this mental model, let's explore exactly how senior architects logically structure their time at the whiteboard.
All right, here is your chronological 15-minute whiteboard template. You spend the first 2 minutes clarifying requirements, both functional and non-functional, things like scale and latency. By minute 5, you've sketched out the HLD and architecture. By minute 7, you've mapped the request flow so everyone understands the business logic. Around minute 11, you dive into the database ER diagram and the low-level design for a specific feature. And then you reserve those crucial final minutes to discuss how this entire system scales and stays secure.
Because honestly, this right here is what separates a mid-level engineer from a true senior architect. It's not just about making the system work, it's about asking, well, what happens when it breaks? You need to be ready to discuss horizontal versus vertical scaling, talk about high availability and fault tolerance. Mention how you'd use Redis for caching to kill latency, or Kafka for async messaging to decouple your services. Bring up JWT for security and Prometheus or Grafana for observability. These are the literal magic words interviewers are listening for.
This final cheat sheet is basically your ultimate shortcut. Instantly matching the right diagram to the interviewer's question prevents you from freezing up. If they ask to explain the whole system, you draw an HLD. Ask about cloud deployment, that's architecture. Request processing, flow diagram. Service interaction, sequence diagram. If they want to know about code design, hit them with an LLD, and if they ask about data modeling, you immediately draw an ER diagram. Memorize this list, and I promise you will never freeze at a whiteboard again.
So, I leave you with this. You've mapped the city, you've built the rooms, but can your architecture actually survive the traffic at scale? It's a huge question to keep in mind as you prep. A big thanks to Clarify Decode for helping us distill these architectural insights in today's explainer. Remember, the best architects don't just know how to draw diagrams, they know exactly which lens to look through to solve the problem right in front of them. So get out there, practice your progressive zoom, and go master your next system design challenge. See you next time!